You could even be like, today we're doing things different. Today we're going to have a play. There will not be a tutorial. Make a joke.
All right. Hey guys, Sean Dove here, and today we're doing things a bit different. We're going to be less tutorial and more just having a play. This is something I've told myself I want to do more of, with trying new techniques and stepping outside my comfort zone beyond just what I know, and being comfortable with knowing that you'll fail, but hopefully learn something along the way. And I think that's something I've really been able to take away from trying to pursue a creative career. And that's been okay with knowing you'll fail, but learn things along the way. And that learning by doing is probably the biggest takeaway I can give. I think this idea of play and learning by doing and focusing less on that perfect outcome is what being creative is all about. And I know for me, that is what drew me to want a career where I could be creative. When I think of creatives that have managed to continue that sense of play and integrate it with successful creative careers, the first that come to my mind are FOREALS founders Simon and Dirk Schuster. These guys clearly love what they do, and it's shown in their tongue-in-cheek creative right through to their playful language as a self-proclaimed non-award-winning design studio. Now, if you follow them on social media, you'll see they recently participated in the 36 Days of Type, which is an open call to all creatives where they create a new letter each day, working through the entire alphabet. And the work these guys were doing blew me away. They made this mixed media series combining 3D text and this illustrative details they hand drew. I know, crazy. Safe to say these guys really inspired me, and I wanted to have a go at this mixed media look myself. Alright, so my drawing skills aren't at the level that the guys over at FOREALS. We have got some Wacom tablets in at work, so I am excited to give that a bit of a go, and I will practice. But for now I'm thinking, let's have a go using Cinema, and we'll try and play a bit with the Sketch and Toon renderer. Let me start this off by saying, I don't really know the Sketch and Toon renderer, so I thought this is probably a good chance for us to try this whole play idea. But I will say, anything I'm going to talk about, EJ Hassenfratz has probably got a beautiful tutorial going over the exact same stuff, but more eloquently, of course. Alright, with that said, let's jump in. We'll start having a bit of a play. So I was playing around, I was thinking we could also use a logo for this little technique. And I thought having some shoelaces hanging down, wrapping around the Supreme logo could look pretty cool. And I was almost going to start at this point here and just focus on building up those shoelaces. But let's rewind quickly and build up this 3D logo. So I've imported my Supreme Spline into Cinema. Let's zero out its position on X, Y, and Z. Great, now what I'm going to do is just grab my rectangle selection and remove those points on the outside. Nice. Now, normally you drop something like this into an extrude, maybe throw on some fillet caps, bring down that radius a little bit. Come on, let's give these a few more subdivisions as well. And you're going to see it starts to intersect a little bit. And of course, we're going to bring down that radius a bit. But I find with something like this, you don't have a heap of control over the spacing of these elements. Now, I find typically logos aren't designed great to work in 3D. So what I need to do is separate each of these letters as their own separate spline. So what I'm going to do is select a point on our S here, hit UI to grow that selection, and continue doing that till I've got all my points. Then I'm going to hit UP to split it off, and then I'll now separate it as its own separate spline, and I can delete it off our original spline. Now I'll do that to the remaining letters, also remembering to grab that inside spline of the particular letters. Now what we need to do is drop a cloner into my scene. I'm going to select all our splines here and drop it into that cloner. First thing I'll do is zero out any of that Y height, and then I need to increase my count to 7 to match the number of splines within my cloner. Great, now that cloner is showing each of those separate splines. Now if I drop this cloner back into our extrude, you're only going to see that first spline actually appear. So what we'll need to do is add a connect into our scene and make our cloner a child of that first. Now if I zoom in here, you're going to see we're intersecting with some of our splines. So what we can do is give them some spacing along that X axis. Now we don't want to push this too far and ruin the logo, but we can just add that little bit of extra spacing, which helps it work in 3D. All right, lighting. Now what I'm going to do for this is just use Grayscale Gorilla's HDR Studio rig just to get some quick feedback for us here, guys. And you can see which HDR I'm using here with a nice big softbox to our left and a couple of little highlight lights on our right. All right, let's make a material for this. I want to get this nice reflective, busted up metal look. So I'm going to load up this image into my diffuse, and I'll pop a link down below for you guys. And I'm going to feed that same image into my bump. Let's jump into this. And all I'm going to do here is just create a bit more contrast by playing with those black and white points. All right, let's come over to our Reflectance channel. I'm going to add a Beckman into my scene and just increase the roughness. Great, I'm going to throw that onto our extrude, change our projection to something like cubic. I'm just going to jump back into our bump and pull our strength down to something like 5%. Let's hit render and take a look at that. Great, we're getting some nice highlights on those edges of our extrude. And we're actually getting some nice detail across the face of the logo, and that's really nice too. All right, let's have a look at the sketch side of things. All right, sweet. Now that we're at this point, I'm going to start to build out the geometry that we're going to turn into our sketch style. So what I'm going to try and achieve is this shoelace looking like it's wrapping around our geometry here. All right, so what's probably the easiest way to do that? Let's grab ourselves a Helix Spline. And we're going to use this to form a basic path for where we want our sketch shoelace to end up being. All right, let's rotate this around to the ZY plane, so that way we're running the same direction as our text here. And I'm just going to shrink both my start and end radiuses so it's a little bit tighter on the actual geometry. Just going to add a protection tag to this camera so I don't go and stuff it up and move it around as we're playing here. And I'll jump out of that camera. Might even hide the HDR studio rig for the moment just so that doesn't get in our way. And we'll turn that back on when we go to do our final render. This helix is already giving us some nice basic shapes to start with. I like that it's a bit tighter on the R, it's a bit looser on the M, and that sort of different scale of sizing is what's going to help sell the organic look. All right, let's add a little bit of extra height as well so we can extend it to the end of our text here. And what I'm thinking is we'll make it come from above, wrap around, and then dangle down a little bit. We might try and get a bit of overlapping as well happening within that shape. We're going to be manipulating this spline quite a bit, but this is just going to give us a nice starting point. Now, in my tests, what we're going to be doing is making this editable and then manipulating it from there. So at the moment, if I hit C on this spline, you're going to notice we've got heaps of points, 101 to be exact. So let's undo that. And what we can do is down in our subdivisions field, within that actual helix, if we drop this down, let's say something like 20, it's not going to really affect our spline. We've still got this nice smooth motion throughout. But now when we hit C to make it editable, we've now got only 21 points. So we've been able to simplify it a bit. So I might even go a little bit further. Let's go, knock this down to 15. Dumb that spline down a little bit. It'll make it a bit easier for us to work with. I'm going to make a copy of it just so we can come back to it if we want. Hide that for the moment and make our original helix editable by hitting C. Now we can do things like grab that first point of this spline, and what I will do is just pull this off frame. Sounds like someone's got the angle grinder out, which is always great. Hopefully that comes through for you guys. Nice, so now we can see in this front view, we've got our shoelace coming from above, and then it's ultimately wrapping around our text here. I'm going to do the same with our endpoint and just pull that down so it dangles a little bit beneath our actual geometry. So now that we've got the top and tail in about the right position that we want for this, let's start giving ourselves a bit of geometry to look at here. And I think it's going to help us be able to manipulate this spline and put it exactly where we want it to go. So I'm just going to use a sweep node. So I'm going to hold down, we'll hold down Alt with our helix selected. That'll make that a child instantly of that. Let's grab ourselves a circle and I'll drop that above the helix within that sweep. All right, let's scale this right down. Let's scale this down. Somewhere about 10 should be nice. I still want a big chunky shoelace. I want that cartoony finish. Might even go something like 12 for this actually. Now, so we don't have to make our circle editable, but to flatten it out a bit, make us get that shoelace look with our circle selected, let's come over to the coordinates tab within that circle. And now we can actually just manipulate either the X, Y, or Z and just shrink it down a little bit. You can see no matter which direction Z actually isn't going to do anything for us in this case. So we can play with either the X or Y, scale that down a little bit, and we're getting to get that flatter finish. And when you can start to see that shoelace coming through. All right, let's grab our helix again. Turn off my circle. And what we can do is now just start deleting points on this spline. Trying to simplify it a bit, getting smoother motions happening around. So you can see I'm just trying to reposition, pulling our Bezier points, trying to get a bit of a rounder finish. Just jumping between my rotate and move tools. And the kind of fun thing is there's no right or wrong outcome that we're ultimately looking for. I'm just trying to get something that feels like it's sitting on top of our geometry, a little bit looser at the bottom, perhaps, thinking about gravity. How would an actual shoelace be wrapped around this thing? I know we're still going for that sketched look, but as realistic as we can make the interaction, the better it's going to ultimately look. So I'm just working along this spline, softening some of these points up. As always, guys, I find there's always more than one way to achieve a particular look. So, of course, this isn't the only way to attack something like this, but what this allowed was to give me a nice starting point at least. Great, this is feeling like a pretty good start for us. Now, at the moment, you can see on top, especially on top of our M where our shoelace is sitting at the moment, it's a bit funky. We're sitting on its edge where really would be flattening out a bit here. So rather than going in and trying to manipulate our spline any further, I'm kind of happy with the shape we're getting where it's feeling organic, and that's what I'm ultimately going for. So I'm going to jump into my sweep, come over to the object tab, and we'll scroll down and we're going to just play, and we're going to have a look at playing with rotation. Now at the moment you can see our spline is completely flat in the center, and if I do something as simple as pull our start point down to the base and our end point up, what this is going to be doing is creating a single rotation throughout that entire geometry, and already this starts to feel more organic and natural. I'm going to undo that for a second because now we can use this rotation spline editor, if you will, to really art direct that final piece. Now we can add additional points to this spline by holding down Command, and there you can see by rotating it through the middle here, it's going to be affecting the middle of our spline. A nice way to think of this is the actual start and end point of our physical spline within the scene. So by pulling that midpoint up a little bit, we're able to feel like we're sitting a little bit neater on top of that M. Pull our start point down a little bit. Now we're getting a nice wrap around that R as well. And of course, how many points you include within the spline is completely up to us now. We can really enhance those details, exaggerate them if we want. So in this same object section within the sweep where we've been affecting the rotation, we can also come in and have a bit of a play with the scale. Now, for example, if I taper our end down here, you're going to see we almost completely disappear. We've really thinned it out until ultimately coming back to that final length that we've set at the end there. So we'll undo that, and we know that this point here is actually the start. And by holding down Command, I'm just going to make an additional point pretty close to our end point here. And now when I start to taper this down, we're only affecting just the ends here. See, already here with that little bit of taper, it just helps sell this final look a bit. All right, now let's have a look at building out that little plastic tip that we see at the end. Now to do this, I think I'm going to use something like a cylinder. So let's just check our circle spline. We had a radius of 12, so we know that the plastic tip ultimately needs to be smaller than that. So I'm going to just change our radius to something like 5, and even that still feels quite chunky. All right, maybe 3 is going to be a better shape for us. So now what we'll do, let's add in our spline wrap into our scene. Let's drop that spline wrap as a child of our cylinder. And we can use the same helix that's within our shoelace and drop that into our spline field here. Now by default, the spline wrap's going to try and wrap our entire cylinder around that spline. And because we've got no height segments, it's freaking out a bit. So let's just go something like 20, start to smooth it out a little bit. And actually what we also need to do is change our axis from plus X to plus Y. And now it's wrapping it the same direction that our cylinder is orientated. What I'll also do is rather than fit spline, let's go keep length. So now we're going to be maintaining the length that we set for our cylinder. Now what's cool is we can just offset this into the negative a bit. And now that's pushing beyond and now that's going to push beyond our spline, but allow it to just poke out the end here, and we're going to start to see that little plastic tip, and it really helps to finish this whole look. Nice. We've got this set, we've got our floor in. So let me just hit render quickly so you can see what we've got. Now without any textures, it's going to feel 3D. We're going to feel like this is sort of part of our actual scene. So now let's try and make this feel like a sketched shoelace wrapping around. Now the first thing we're going to need to do is jump over into our standard renderer. Let's go Effects. And to pull off this look, we're going to be using Sketch and Tune. Now by default, if we hit render again, you can see that gets applied globally to everything, and that's not what we're after at all. So let's come up to the lines within Sketch and Tune. I'm going to turn off folders, creases, and borders. Let's hit render again, just in our viewport. All right, that looks like that's removed that from our scene. All right, let's come over to shading, and I think we just need to turn this off. I don't think we want any background shading. I think that was what was giving us that white background. So essentially now we're almost back to where we were just a moment ago. So now we're almost back where we were before. We've got our simplified scene, and we're not getting any of that sketch look applied globally. And before we go any further, we've turned our background shading off, but I think we also just want to turn any object shading off as well. So let's feed that sketch onto our shoelace. I'm going to hit render and just see what we've got here. Nice. It's a little bit tough to see at the moment, but this sketch material is now applying kind of like an outline to the edges of our actual geometry that we've set for our shoelace. So what I might do is group both my shoelace and the little plastic tip that we've built. And I'll apply that sketch material to the null itself, so it's applying to both. And this is going to be our shoelace. All right, I think we're going to leave this pretty much default. I'm happy with just the consistent thickness that we're getting. And let's just increase it a little bit more so you can see what we're getting. We're getting this nice thick outline of our entire shoelace here. And it's already starting to feel a little bit more hand-drawn. We're losing a bit of that perspective on the edging. All right, great. So we've got our sort of outline sketch, but now we've got to get that filled. We've got to get this looking like we want to get this looking like a bit more of a hand-shaded finish. So let's create a new material. I'm going to turn off color and reflectance, and we're just going to focus on the luminance. So let's load that up. Come over to texture, come down to sketch and tune, and we're going to be using the cell shader. So I'm going to apply this to our shoelace, jump into it and hit render, and let's have a bit of a look at what's going on here. So by default, this cell shader gives us this blue gradient. And the way I like to think about it is the dark blue here that it's set, that's kind of like our shadows. Works through next to our midtones and then our highlights at the end. And you can notice those highlights are very front facing on our actual geometry. And the reason for that is this little camera checkbox is ticked. And what that means is our texture is going to recognize our camera as the light source. So if I turn that off and hit render again, what you're going to notice is we just get that flat shadow color, because essentially we're now telling it there's no lights in this scene. So it'll just recognize that darkest color within our diffuse and ultimately apply that globally. So what we will do is actually use lights to be able to have a bit more control over art directing where we want those highlights and shadows to appear. So I'll hit render, and even though we've selected light, because we don't have any lights in our scene, we're not going to get any change within our actual material. I'm going to grab these two lights that I had set up from before. These are just standard Cinema 4D Omni Lights with no shadowing and no visible light. Let me jump into my 4Views and you can see where I've got these guys. My first one here is just to the left of our geometry, and it's quite low. It's sort of just that little edging, that highlight light front left of our scene. Our other light, which is a bit further back and a bit more right of our actual geometry, and still allowing us to get some nice detail from both left and right of our scene here. Great, so now that we've got these two lights, let's jump back into our cell shader, and we're going to put them both into this little lights field. And rather than saying exclude, we're going to say include. So let's take a bit of a look at this now. You can see we're now getting those nice highlights and shadows happening within our shoelace here. So by default, in this cell shader, we've got this bit of a blue gradient. And what I like to do is more or less desaturate the entire thing. So I get this nice tonal shift from essentially black to almost white. And what I might even do is just add an additional knot within the shadowing so we can really push it a bit further, make it a bit darker right at the tip there. So we can add as many knots as we want to this diffuse, but the more we add, the smoother the end finish is going to look. So I tend to stick around 4 to 5, and that's been able to give me a nice sketch finish. I'm also going to turn on my shadows field. Let's just take another look at that. Great, so we've actually been able to get this nice sketch look. We're actually been able to get this sketch look pretty quickly. But what I'm thinking is, rather than just that black to white diffuse, what I really want, I wanted this to be that supreme red. I wanted these to be really punchy shoelaces hanging off the logo. So one way I like to do that, so let's come back into our material where we've set that cell shader up. And I'm going to put that into a layer. Let's jump into our layer. So what I want to do here is leave my cell shader with that black to white knots, and we're going to color it and tint it in other ways. So let's come over to effects, and we're going to add a hue, saturation, and lightness. Now if I hit colorize and pull my saturation to 100%, and what this is doing is tinting that black to white gradient that we've set within our cell shader. And what I love about this is, rather than changing all those knots to find the color we're happy with, we can quickly come in here, shift the hue, and get a completely different look almost instantly. So I'm going to pull this all the way to 360, and that's going to give us a red finish. Hit render, and to be quite honest, I'm already pretty happy with this. I'm starting to pay a bit of respect to that supreme red, bringing a bit of the brand features there. All right, this is kind of looking cool. I think what we actually need to do is pull that plastic tip out from our shoelace lock up here, and I'm going to copy those same materials to it. The reason I'm doing this is I want to make a dupe of that little cell shader we've set up, but I'm not going to affect any of the hue, saturation, or lightness. I actually just want that black to gray. I actually just want that black to white gradient that we've set, and we'll use that to just light our plastic tip. Pull that little tip out a bit more, and makes the whole thing more easily recognizable for what it actually is. All right, I'll probably tinker a little bit more, maybe add an extra shoelace in, play a bit more. I'll give you guys a look at the final piece. All right, I'll see you guys in just a sec. All right, guys, so I've had a bit more of a play, and this is where I've ended up getting it to. This is my little attempt at trying to generate that sketch fuse with that 3D finish, and I'm pretty happy with what we've been able to get here, guys. So as you might see, I more or less started again. I wasn't happy with how I was getting that wrap at the beginning, so I grabbed another Helix, started manipulating that, and for me, I found that real helpful, giving myself a bit of a starting point, especially going for that wrap look. The Helix really lends itself to that. So just like before, I set these up exactly the same way. Use that Helix as a bit of a starting point for us. Use that sweep nib, tapered the ends off a little bit, trying to get that little pinch as it comes back into those little plastic tips. And nice, as this comes through, we can start to see we're getting a nice harsh shift from highlight to shadow to those mid-tones. Now, like I mentioned, what I found real impressive with the guys at We Are For Real is the fact that it's all hand-drawn, and that understanding of light and shadowing is so important with something like this. And I think that's what I've been able to take away from this sketch and toon renderer, is that it gives us that almost instantly. And for someone like me whose drawing skills just aren't quite there, this is a lot of fun to be able to still have a go at this technique. And it's always fun to think a little bit outside the box and come up with these different ways to achieve similar outcomes. All right, guys, hope that was a bit of fun for you. I enjoyed it, something a bit different, just mucking around, jumping in, trying something different. Guys, I hope you can take something away from it, or at least enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys again soon. Cheers.